start with quick introductions by each of our speakers. Just tell us a bit about your professional backgrounds and what you do in your day-to-day lives now. We'll start with Ben.
G'day, how are you? And thanks everybody for the invite to be here. As was mentioned before, Matthew can't be here tonight. He's very sorry, and he gives his apologies because this is an important organisation to be involved in, and what you're all doing here is something to be celebrated. For me, very quickly, I did a computer science degree. I did 15 years in the military, and then I spent about 14 years as an entrepreneur building businesses. And the most recent one that we've co-founded is called Pen 10, which is a Canberra-based business. And I'm currently responsible for looking after a team that's building out AI solutions to create fake things to detect hackers on networks.
Cool. Sounds awesome. We'll move on to Rachel.
Thanks, Sam. Hey, everyone. I'm Rachel Greaves. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Castle Point Systems. So my background is I was an ANU student. I did my honours there in arts, actually, in Latin and anthropology, and ended up working in STEM by accident. I've done records management, project management, security, audit. I'm certified in all of those things. And after 10 or 15 years experience doing that, I designed a software solution that's a new kind of artificial intelligence that lets those people who do those jobs do it more efficiently and more effectively. So our company is a Canberra-based company. We've got about 25 staff at the moment, and we grew from just the two of us about 2 years ago.
Very interesting career path from Latin Systems. Cool. Tessa.
Hi, thanks again for inviting me. I'm Tessa. So my background is I graduated in 2010 from USQ up in Queensland. I did an IT degree, moved down to Canberra. I wasn't planning on staying in Canberra, but I started out as a grad at IBM, and I think from there I've worked in, gradually jumping to smaller companies, and I've ended up at Instacluster, and I'm one of the managers there for our technical operations team. So it's really hard to describe what we do at Instacluster. It's like we offer our main product is a NoSQL database offering where we provide a managed service to companies that want to do all fancy stuff with all their big data, and we enable them to be able to do that by looking after all their databases all in the cloud and stuff like that. And that's me.
Awesome. So now we've heard about you as people. Can you tell us a bit about your startups or the companies you work for? Just tell us what they do, how that begun, and just the start of the journey, I suppose. We'll start with Ben again.
Thanks, Sam. So we started Pen 10 about 5 years ago in 2016. There was 4 of us. We transitioned out of a previous business called M5 Network Security, so same founder group that put that together, and we've grown the business from the 4 of us to 135 now over the past 5 years. It's been quite a great journey. But before that, I left the military. There's a bit of irony at the time, but all I wanted to do was IT security. And so I wrote a letter, as a silly person the military does, to write a letter to people that are much more responsible than me, and just said, listen, I'm willing to stay the same rank in my life. I just want to work in IT security, and that's all I really want to do. This was about 20 years ago. And they wrote a lovely letter back to me and said, we really can't see a pathway where people can specialise in IT security. And so you probably need to find your own pathway and journey. And so I left and started a business with a small group of friends to do some consulting. And part of that was to work in the IT security area in that space and build out that capability. And I guess, like a lot of people, you start a journey trying to work out what you're going to do in life. And what persuaded me to take the challenge was I found the right group of people to work with. And I think that's really important. And they encouraged me to take that step, and I've never looked back.
Awesome. Rachel?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so for me, as I mentioned, I have been consulting for a long time, and one of the main things that I did with my co-founder was audit. So security audit, records management, compliance, privacy, all the things that government organisations and large regulated entities have to do. They have to follow these rules. The appetite for compliance has historically been pretty low. Government especially, who are the ones who make the rules, are absolutely the most likely to break the rules. So most of what we were seeing was just failures. And for a long time, failures were seen as just like, oh, well, never mind, it's just compliance. But then some things happened that were actually pretty catastrophic. So one example was a woman called Vivian Salon. She was a really vulnerable woman with a mental illness. She was found with a head injury in a park in Lismore. She'd been assaulted, they think. And the Department of Immigration at the time deported her because they couldn't find her record in their record keeping system. An inquiry found that it was there the whole time, it just wasn't discoverable. So she was sent to the Philippines and left in a home for the dying and destitute until a Good Samaritan tracked her down. And her son, she actually left him at daycare. She never picked him up. And this woman just disappeared. And she was gone from her family's life. So really catastrophic impact on her and on her loved ones. And unfortunately, it's not the only time I've seen that. So we saw something similar happen with Cornelia Rao. You might have seen the ABC series Stateless recently. Another Australian citizen unlawfully detained in immigration detention because her records couldn't be related across systems. We saw Paul Maguire die in the Grasstree mine because records weren't updated properly. We've seen gas pipelines explode and kill 8 people and level 25 houses in the US because records were incorrect. So as well as obvious things that happen with security breaches, and I saw a lot of those in the military that directly put lives at risk, not being able to find things and not being able to manage the integrity and quality of information has really, really serious impacts. So we kept finding these problems, but we didn't have a solution for these government departments. We could say, look, this is totally insecure. And they'd say, well, like shit, what do you want us to do about it? It's impossible. There's too much data, there's too many systems, and there's too many rules. So we designed a new system. So what our system does is it reads all of the data. It doesn't matter what format it's in or what system or how old it is or how new it is. It reads all that information and it registers it centrally and it makes it all discoverable. And it has to do that without needing IT's involvement. So it doesn't have any agents or connectors. That was really key. And that's that key thing that, we embedded into the startup model that we had. We had to have this capability that everybody needs that adds a lot of value, but it just can't have any detrimental impacts or no one will do it. They'll let the Vivians of the world just keep getting affected the way that they are. So the system reads all the data, registers it, and then importantly, as well as making it discoverable and auditing it and tracking everything that happens to it, it regulates it automatically. So we use a kind of artificial intelligence called rules as code, where we take a regulation or some legislation or some rules, and we turn that into code that the machine can understand. So what we end up with is a system that is telling the organisation, hey, you've got these records over here, they're high risk, they have sensitive information, they have risky information, they need to be kept for a long time, they're subject to a royal commission. These are the rules around how you need to handle that information, and we'll tell you if anyone breaks those rules. So because we now can do this with AI, suddenly we can stop those impacts happening. And that's why we developed the solution the way that we did.
Sounds like an extremely complex and important problem. And Tessa.
Hi. So Instacluster started, I think there were 2 guys that started, I think back in 2012. they were actually working on something else at the time, and they were, I can't even describe what they were working on, but they needed a database backend, a NoSQL database, and they were looking at options. They found that a database called Cassandra would tick all their boxes, but they didn't want to have to manage it themselves. They wanted to find someone to do it for them, and that kind of brought about the fact that there was no one really out there in the market who was providing that kind of service. And so from there, they pretty much pivoted and started to build their own startup around that whole providing Cassandra as a managed service. And they built a proprietary provisioning platform, all in AWS, and from there it's grown to support several different open source offerings. And when I joined in 2018, I think we're mainly based in Canberra, and there was a few people in the US, and now it's just grown from, I think I joined when it was around 50 or so people, and now it's gone up to over 250 across the world. We've recently acquired a company based in Germany that provide a PostgreSQL, like a third-party support service. So it's just kind of exploded from there, and we've got offices in the US, the UK, and people dotted around all over the globe, especially with COVID going on. We've moved to much more of a remote working, especially now in Canberra. We're all working from home. And what else can I say? So different offerings that we have are obviously Cassandra was our main one, and it's still our biggest one today. Kafka, if you've heard of that. So they're all Apache Cassandra, Apache Kafka, Elasticsearch. You may have come across that in your degrees, maybe. And drawing blanks. Redis and Postgres is the new one that we've started to bring aboard our managed service. So and the team that I'm in, we do almost like a technical support, third-party level support for other businesses that are running these databases in their own company, and they want us just like a third party, or we have those and run that in our managed service as well. We also have a huge dev department in Canberra as well, which is pretty huge, and we've just spun up an office in Melbourne as well, so we started recruiting there. And then we obviously have sales and marketing and all that dotted around the place, and I hope that kind of explains what we do. I'm sure that people will ask questions, so I'll be happy to answer them after this or during.
Absolutely, that was perfect. I've no doubt there'll be plenty of questions because it's a very technically interesting topic. Cool. So obviously when these companies were first started and as they grow, they face challenges. And anyone who might have an idea who is looking to grow their own company is also going to face challenges. What kind of challenges did you guys face when you were either starting your company or getting started at your company that you had to overcome in order to continue progressing? I'll start with Ben.
Thanks, Sam. I reckon there's lots of problems that we've created ourselves, but I reckon and you do that as a founder, right? But I reckon the biggest one the challenge that we faced was actually around a lack of confidence by Australian consumers in Australian-made stuff. And that would really surprise you. And it still surprises me because statistically, we should have the same number of smart people as there are in other places in the world, no different. But for some reason, we as Australians have been consumer of IT products, over the last couple of decades, and we look to certain places and attach a real strong value to products and ideas that come out of those locations, and not a lot of value in our own ideas. And, you know, that's a strength and a weakness as a nation, but really, you know, I find that it's becoming a bit of an anchor that we've really got to get over. There is, every time I meet new people in Australia, I'm amazed at the wonderful and amazing things that they're doing. And it reminds me that we here in Australia are doing really clever things. And I think the real challenge we've got is how to get everybody in Australia, because we're going to start somewhere. When you're a startup, you need your first customer, and it makes a lot of sense to do that locally. But it's really difficult because if you've got an Australian consumer and they want to buy US-based products in the tech sector, how do you encourage them to give you a go or take a chance on what you're doing? And I think that's really difficult. But I think we've all got to collectively work together in that. We've got to keep highlighting the really smart things that Australians are doing in this space, and there's lots. It's enormous. And keep reminding people, our friends, our families, the people who we speak to, that Australian tech inventions are actually some of the best in the world. Now, we're not going to solve all the problems in the entire space, but when we do focus on a niche area, we actually do things in a really clever way, because we're forced to, because we don't often have the resources that other nations have in this space. And so I just think that's the biggest challenge we've got, and you'll all have creating startups in Australia is this need to find the difficulty in finding a first customer here in Australia, particularly in Canberra. If you're looking towards the government sector, it's not really geared for that startup community, and so you're going to have to find probably that first customer in the Sydney and Melbourne base, or sadly, like the Pen 10, the previous businesses that we've created, we've had to find the first customer overseas and then bring it back to Australia, that reference, to give the Australian customer confidence to buy, you know, the technology that is 3 kilometres down the road.
So, very interesting issue. I think anyone who's ever looked at Pen 10's website or any promotional material has seen the emphasis you guys put on being Australian-owned, Australian-made. It's definitely there. Rachel.
Back on mute. Yeah, so obviously there's lots of challenges for any kind of business that you want to start. Every business owner who's setting up their own thing just has to work a lot of hours. You just have to. Funding is challenging in the early stages. The best sources of funding are clients. And again, it can be hard to get those first clients. We took an approach where we built credibility with the market that we wanted to sell to through our years and years of working with them and consulting. So when we were ready with a product, we had lots of clients already who were very happy to adopt it. So we had our first clients actually were FedGov, which is ideal because there's so much cachet in that it's then easy to go and sell it to anybody else, any other government or any other industry. If the Department of the Treasury is using it, it must be good, right? So finding the first ones, if you don't have an avenue into that market, is difficult. There's a lot more focus now in government procurement on data sovereignty, on Australian-owned companies, on sovereign technology as well. So they do want to see companies that are Australian-owned and data that's hosted and domiciled in Australia. But it is hard to just get those first ones and the runs on the board. The real challenge we find with how Australian companies are perceived in Australia isn't, it's partly that, yes, you have to build credibility. But it's also that the valuations, the venture capital valuations in Australia are an order of magnitude lower than they would be in the US. So when we eventually bootstrapped as far as we could possibly bootstrap, with both of us working like 60-hour weeks all the time and putting everything back into the company, and we needed to fundraise. If we had done that fundraise in the US, we obviously would have raised much more at a much higher valuation. So the market here, especially in Canberra, I find the sort of first step, which is your angel funding or that early seed funding, it's going to be a pretty low ball valuation. And you do have to fight for the valuation, but there's ways to do that. So runs on the board, obviously, credibility with clients, super important. But we invested effort in applying for grants and winning them, applying for awards and winning them. So, we're in our second year now, and we just won our 9th major award. And the way to do that is just to apply, you know, and do a really strong application, spend the time on it, because all those things are qualitative things that help increase the value of the company, even when the MRR is low, even when the number of clients is low. There's other ways to boost the value, but you really do have to fight for evaluation, because otherwise you'll end up diluting all of your ownership in the very first fundraise and you'll have nowhere to go. So that was definitely a challenge for us, is finding people who would see the real value of the company and invest in it at a sensible amount rather than trying to keep it as low as they could.
Oh, thanks for that. I think as a lot of students especially get bogged down in the technical side of their ideas, and maybe that's something they don't consider altogether when they're thinking about with startups. That's really interesting insight. Tessa.
Hi. So I can't really talk to the challenges faced right at the start, because I joined, you know, a fair few years after they started. So, but one of the challenges that I did see when I joined was, so I think joined when there was just over 50 people, and it's almost, I mean, it's at the point now where we can't really call it a startup, but it still kind of is in a way. If you think back of what you imagine the tech startup to be in movies and that sort of thing, there's been a group of core people who have been really, really quick at coding up everything. They don't think about you know, looking at approvals or anything like that. It's just straight into prod, you know, overnight, people staying up all night and that sort of thing. And that kind of startup culture, that doesn't last forever. So to say, if you're going to join a startup and you're expecting that, that's really maybe right at the start, but it's not going to be forever. And I think some of the challenge there, at least when I joined, is there was a group of people who were so used to having that kind of culture and just pushing everything to prod, and then when, you know, the growing pains of having to introduce procedure and compliance, as Rachel mentioned before, you know, all those checks and balances that have to be done, because right now there's much more at stake when things, you know, do go wrong, and which they do. There needs to be, you know, a whole process of you know, people checking, change management, release process, and that sort of thing. Whereas, so I think that was quite a big challenge for people who had been there from the beginning, to be able to change, actually, you know, I have to slow down. I can't just do everything at once. So, and I think that's pretty normal going from that. And I think, yeah, when I joined, it was a lot about trying to introduce process, but not letting that process hinder, you know, or stifle, you know, people's creativity as well. And that was quite, you know, there was a few probably procedures that were kind of scrapped, and it was a very much you talk about agile, just incremental change over time, seeing what works, throwing something out there. If it's not work, adapting that, making it better, and continuously improving that. And over time, you know, people will leave and join something that's new and exciting and faster. But I think that's part of the cycle of a startup. You know, I don't really know what more to say about that, but it's just trying to change your way of thinking and how you're approaching your work, and I think that was a big challenge for a lot of people having to overcome. So yeah, it's another perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think anyone that's ever worked for a you know, a startup or even a small to, you know, medium-sized business will speak to the difficulty of finding and refining that internal process. Cool. So sorry, just cool. So Do you have any advice for the students that are here today that might have an idea or interested in following a similar career path to start a company, or they know of a company that they would like to get involved in? Do you have any advice for them?
Yes, Sam, I'll kick it off. Firstly, I reckon what you're talking about here in this conversation is really important. There's a lot of emphasis when you're doing a degree, and even when you're doing your schooling, for the outcome to be all focused around being the best employee you can be. You know, it's all about get this job or do this degree because that's going to make you the best employee. And, you know, I think, you know, as you can see, there's a viable pathway, a genuinely viable pathway for you to be self-employed. And there's a growing level of confidence in people being able to do this. And I think that's fantastic. So firstly, you know, starting your own business is a legitimate career, you know, and it doesn't mean it's not about ticking boxes and, I know it's terrible to say over the UC channel, and completing degrees. It's about picking up those skills that you're going to need to be the best person in that role. I would say, from my experience, that it's a team sport, not an individual game, and I say that because very quickly in that journey you find that you need to have two really distinct skills and experiences to have success in this space. And it's very rare that a single individual will have both of those or have the time to invest in being the best they can in that space. So in the first instance, you need somebody who's going to take responsibility for running the business. And there's so much to learn in that space. But you know what? There's actually some great places that you can pick those skills up. Don't go with a big bang. Don't throw your big idea out there first. Join an organisation like this or a volunteer organisation and stick your hand up and take some responsibility for running it or organising it, and you will grow those experiences in how to run something, how to work with people, and they're really important skills that you need that you just can't get a degree in. You know, you have to do it just by practice and learning and honing your craft. The second thing you want to do, if we're talking about tech sector here, is you need to have somebody in the team that's got a, you know, that's able to execute on an idea, you know, and is going to invest in making sure that idea at least gets to that first stage that Tessa was talking about before you need to bring on, you know, much more cleverer people than yourself. But you need someone to invest in that. And so I would say, from my experience, it's about specialization. You know, it's about foregoing the idea of being a generalist in an area and really finding a really niche area where you can see a problem and getting to be a jet at that particular thing. And anybody can do that. All you need is application.
Very interesting. Rachel.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, Ben, I agree. You've got to understand what you're doing. So it's great to have a good idea. Really good ideas are really important, but what I see a lot is that really clever technology people come up with really clever technologies. They come up with solutions, but there isn't really a problem for that solution. You know, they think this will be great, but they don't really understand the life and times of the people who would use it. So I'm getting signal quality warnings, guys. Sorry. So if I get a bit glitchy, just wave your hand at me. I'll change the Wi-Fi. So I actually, like, obviously, as I mentioned, I'm a certified records manager, not a technologist. But Gavin, the CTO, when we came up with this idea, I asked him to go and get certified as a records manager, and he did, because he has to understand the problem of the people that are going to buy the product. So you really do need to do that. And that's not something that you'll do at uni. Like, you're not going to go and do another degree in like business administration because you want to sell technology to business managers. But you can do a Cert 4, you can do a course, you can do an online, you know, certificate. Like, there's lots of ways that you can become an expert in the problem as well as the solution. And you need to do that. The other thing that I think is important is that I think we've got to stop thinking that being an innovator is enough. Everyone's an innovator. Everything's innovative. You have to be, like, for want of a better word, you have to be disruptive. as well. So your idea can be really great and really cool and brand new and solve a really big problem. But if the delivery of that is going to be expensive, or it's going to cause impacts on people and their normal productivity, if it's going to require a lot of training, if it's going to affect the supportability and sustainability of the systems it interacts with, it's a non-starter straight away. So you have to have a great idea, but it has to be delivered without those negative impacts, because people are much more fixated on losing $2 than on the possibility of gaining $4, you know? So you can't have a solution that's going to cause negative impacts or nobody will buy it. That's really important too. So I think they're the key things. Like, you've really got to understand the problem that you're solving, put yourself in the shoes of the people that you want to sell it to, and you've got to make sure that it is not just better, but it's cheaper, it's faster, it's smoother, and it's easier than anything else that you're competing with.
Very interesting insight into that, because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people get too weighed down in the, at least, you know, from a software developer's point of view, I think a lot of people get too weighed down in the, you know, technical side of it, and they might neglect to consider something like that.
Yeah.
Tessa.
I just agree with everything Ben and Rachel have said. Some really good advice there. I mean, I think, yeah, I'm always surrounded by very smart people that are coming up with ideas every day, but it takes a lot more than just an idea to kind of turn into a company. And I think another good resource that I think I've attended events in the past is the Canberra Innovation Network, if you've heard of them, and they've got, I think, a lot of good resources and events, and you can talk to other entrepreneurs too and see how they've started their journey as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people haven't heard of the Canberra Innovation Network, but it's really very recommended, you know. Cool. So all of you have worked in this space for a significant period of time now. What have you found the most rewarding about it compared to a large company? And especially you, Tessa, because you worked at large companies like IBM, as well as small companies like Instacluster. What have you found rewarding about other places in the public sector?
Oh, you're going to start with me? Okay. So I started out, at IBM, and I've moved on to other companies that supported federal government clients. And I think the biggest thing is just, it's hard to explain when you haven't worked in government before, but things move so slowly. To get one little thing approved, you would be amazed what kind of cycle it has to go through in order to get everyone on board and signed off. And then by that time there's another prime minister, and you got to go through the whole thing again, and it just goes so slowly. And I think after and even though it goes so slowly, I found it was quite stressful, especially in the roles that I've been in. I've been supporting, critical infrastructure. So, servers in data centers and databases holding really important data to for Australia, and thinking if one little thing goes wrong, and knowing that it's all kind of just, on a big, it's just like a little bit of a house of cards when you think about the ways that the government have tried to implement some solutions, and you just get so stressed knowing that you're responsible for that. If Australia can't reach this website, that's you that's got to fix that. And it was just so I found that the stress of that really gets to you over time, because there's an on-call component, and that sort of thing. Quite often you'd be the only person or only a small group of people who knows about that technology, and it's a lot of juggling schedules and that sort of thing. So I've slowly moved to companies that are where things move faster, but I have less stress, if that makes sense. And I think as I've gotten older and matured, I think when I first got out of uni, all I wanted was, oh, it'll sound fancy to work at IBM. That sounds so cool because it's such a big company, and you get all the prestige around that, and being able to tell people that, oh, I work with them. But as you get older, the reality of it is you're just kind of like a little cog in the machine, and you're so far removed from the end product and what you're actually contributing to the world. It's so far back, and I wanted to be able to work closer with the people that I'm trying to help. And when I eventually joined Instacluster, I was chasing a role that would allow me a lot of flexibility. I've got 2 young kids as well, where I wouldn't be taking a step back, if that makes sense. I wanted to be able to still progress my career, but go to a company that's allowing me to be flexible and work from wherever I want, and that sort of thing. Whereas the big companies at the time just didn't offer that, which is silly, because we should be able to. We're in tech careers, we can do everything from our computers, and it's crazy. But so yeah, I think when I joined, it's a bit different now with COVID. Different companies now will have their new work from home policies and trying to entice more people to join them. But yeah, at the time, it allowed me to just be flexible. And also, when you start, you'll learn how important it is a workplace culture is when you first join, first roll out of uni. And there can be, when you're a grad, they can I'm generalizing here, maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but companies like to sometimes take advantage of their grads because they're young, they're keen, they're enthusiastic, and they want them to work constantly to the bone, to the point of burnout. And I've worked with grads. There were grads in my IBM program that didn't get through just because they just got so burnt out with the number of hours they were working, and that really sucks. So workplace culture is such a huge thing to consider when you're looking at a role. And when I joined Instacluster, it was so much more like laid back and family friendly, and people talking and being so transparent and open. You could just talk to the CEO. Everyone was on Slack, so everyone can see what everyone's talking about, and you can be involved in anything. And it was a really cool collaborative culture. Whereas in somewhere like IBM, it was very much, you had your little spot, you were told to do this one thing, this is what you're responsible for. If anything happened outside of that, it's another team. You don't need to know about it. Just hand it over to the other team, and you never really got to know the bigger picture. So I think that's what makes smaller companies and startups much more interesting, because you get to learn that whole bigger picture, and you can find out how it all works. Anyway, I've kind of gone around in circles, but it's good. I recommend it, and it's a lot more fun, I'd say. So if you're considering a bigger company, I'm not saying it can't be fun, but I found it's a lot more fun.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think just the culture, I suppose, it's very different
it's
at
huge.
a smaller company. Yeah, absolutely. Ben.
Hey, thank you. Tessa, I just loved your description. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And thanks for sharing that. I got to agree with what you've said there. And you're right. I've worked in big organisations and in the startup community, and there are some strengths and weaknesses of both. And you have to be transparent about that and understand that sometimes in the small places there's this awesome thing where you're involved in everything, but it's also tough because you're involved in everything. So that can be really frustrating. It's hard to define a career path when there's 15 people in the organisation because there's no jobs and titles and roles. And so that can be really challenging to understand where you see yourself in a few years' time or in that space. But be careful what you wish for, because by the time you've got that in place, you're also, you can miss some of that cultural aspect of just being, getting in there and mucking in there and being involved in and enjoying the journey of building something and doing something great. I'll tell you the difference that I find, and Tessa's talked about a lot of those. The first is, when you're starting your own business, you get the chance to make decisions about doing things that are right. And you get to make those decisions. And so I think we've all been in places where, as things scale, they're all set around supporting the generalist position, the bell curve of challenges, and there's not a lot of room for understanding or catering for individual scenarios. It's just the nature of big organisations, right? And with a startup, you get to decide and make decisions in your own way. You can apply an individual rule to every event that you see, and you can cater for those scenarios. So it means you're doing less of the dumb, I'm going to say, where you're spending your days filling in forms and applying for things. You just get on and do the job that you need to do. And when there's an individual circumstance, you make smart adult decisions and you work your way around it. And I genuinely enjoy that in the startup space. It truly does cater for the individual in that area. And I really like that. The second is that you get to work with people. You get to make the selection of who you work with, because it's a small family culture, and you get to work with people that genuinely inspire you. And that's what I enjoy, is that you get to make that choice of sitting side by side with people that are testing you, that are pushing you every single day, and they're there to do something brilliant. And I really like that about the startup community. That just makes you want to be there and get involved in it every day. Whereas I got to say, for me personally, I do get challenged in those large organisations finding out the mission and where I sit in it, and often finding those inspiring people. So I really enjoy that. And thirdly, I think what Tessa touched on is that outcomes focused space just really inspires me as well, where you all feel like you're there as a family to try and solve a problem, and you're really focused on getting that thing done. And with bigger organisations, that's harder to find. Lots of strengths in that bigger organisation. You can have career structure. You can have defined roles and responsibilities. As Tessa said, that you're responsible for that one thing, and that can be really reassuring for some people. But it can also be really limiting as well.
Awesome. I think we're definitely starting to hear a bit of a theme on this question, aren't we? Which is good. It means, it gives us a very clear idea of what is on offer in a startup. And Rachel.
Yeah, that really is the big differentiator, is that you can decide. When you're the founder, you can decide. So, we've been able to embed our own values into the company and make them the company values. So our first value is ethics, which just means we think about impacts on other people. And even as a very small company, when we had less than 10 people, we had a reconciliation action plan. We had a modern slavery plan. Like, we were making sure that we were doing things that we thought were ethical in terms of our supply chain and our community. And as the founder, we got to say, actually, no, we won't sell it to one of the largest tobacco companies in the world. And we won't sell it to this gambling company because they don't line up with our value of ethics. We also were able to embed our value of integrity, which for us means we follow the rules. We're a compliance company. We follow the rules. And having these values embedded in the business plan and in the company manuals has helped us recruit people who share the values. So we've been able to do things that attract people that align with that. So we can kind of unilaterally decide, and we did, that we would offset everybody's personal vehicle with Green Fleet every year. that we would get a composter for the office, and we would have a kitchen garden and compost all the food waste, that we would provide plant-based meals for everybody, always in the fridge all the time. Like, we could make decisions about what we thought were important for sustainability and build them into the structures and the budgets of the company. And you don't get to do that when you work for someone else. And if you're lucky, you work for another company that's values driven, and those values are the same as your values. But most of the time, when companies get big like that and they have multiple owners and they're conglomerated, they're not values driven anymore. So they're driven by the one goal of capitalism, which is make more money. And that goal can really rub up hard against personal values like sustainability and integrity and ethics. So you get to decide, basically, and you get to implement and affect those values in the way that you want to do. And if it costs you margin and profitability, you can decide. You can say that's the price that I want to pay. As you get bigger and you dilute more, it gets harder to have that autonomy. But it's one of the best things that I found about being a startup founder, is that we could do that on our own.
Awesome. So I have one more question before open it to the audience. So audience, feel free to start posting any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll ask them after this one. So our last one is, how do you think people in your position and universities and other startups can increase gender diversity in workplaces? Because obviously that's a big problem at the moment. What do you think, people and companies can be doing to make progress? We'll start with Tessa again. Going that one now.
That is a great question. So, I mean, I don't know if anyone really has the answer apart from, hire more women, but how do you hire more women? I know, especially for when I advertise and recruit for technical roles, I rarely get women apply. I think that the pool of women already is quite small, and then trying to get those women to apply for your roles is it's always a quite a small percentage compared to the number of men, and then so there's that first kind of, I don't know if that's really a barrier. There's that first, the pool's so small. The second one is when they do get an interview, or they may not even apply if we don't use the right words in our job advertisements. So I like to review the ones that we send out, especially in my roles, and I think that's helped a fair bit. I don't know if you've ever read any research about how the more prescriptive your job advertisements are, the less women are more likely to say, oh, I tick this box and this box, or but I don't tick this box, I'm not qualified, I won't apply. Whereas men are more likely to, I don't want to generalize, to just go, I'll just throw my hat in the ring, I'll just do it. So trying to keep the language in those job ads to be a lot more generalist, because really we don't, it doesn't need to be, this person needs to know this exact version of whatever it is, or they've touched it. They can always learn that. You can always teach a lot of tech skills as long as people have that foundation. So I'm trying to not, advertise that much. So next thing is another thing that I try and do is interview. For the first interview, have multiple people in the interview, a diverse panel, or as diverse as you can get within the company, because I think that's one thing that you can help to minimize like unconscious bias, which is a bias that you have that you're not really aware of. So you might interview someone and you're like, I don't like the way that they answered those questions, but you might have another, if it's just you've already excluded that person. But if you have another person, and I've been in interviews before where if I didn't have another person in the room, I probably would have rejected this person who's turned out to be a great employee. and where they've disagreed and said, hey, actually, if you look at this perspective, they actually answered this, or they understood it this way, and having, you know, more people involved in the interview process and a more diverse people involved in the interview process really helps to get, you know, to hire, you know, diverse people. And I think the next thing I wanted to talk about was the number of women, or, you know, people other than, you know, diverse people in management. And I think that's not, you know, something that I look for when I've gone to other companies, is how many women are actually at a level above me. And traditionally there hasn't been that many, or there were at the start, but it's such a small amount. And I think it makes a huge difference. I think when I joined, there was no other women in my team. There was a team of 15. It was all men. And I joined, and since I've joined, there's been, I think, 3 or 4 other women have joined in the 2, almost 3 years that I've been just within my immediate team, and that's huge. And I think if there was more women in those managerial positions, that would happen more often. But for some reason, when it's men doing it, it doesn't happen as often. I don't know. It's all, there's so many books written about it, and I try and look at ones that have the evidence to show what's worked, and that's, yeah, a few of the points that I've seen. Yeah, I'll let Ben and Rachel have a go.
Ben, if you would like to.
Hey, thanks, Sam. This is a really important issue, and I've got to say, I'll stick my hand up. I've arrived late at the realisation here. I just was blind and unaware of the environments that I've been in. Coming from the military, it was very hard to recognise. You'd think it'd be an easy place to recognise, but I'm really blessed. I've got 2 lovely daughters, and I think through that process has really helped me to understand just what a set of biases are present to them as they're, you know, growing up and preparing to, you know, to do something special. And that's really been a really good realization for me, just how much we've gone off track in this space, and just how much work we have to do. And I think we've all got collective responsibilities to keep getting better, and not saying that's enough. We just got to keep driving it. I think the first thing that we need to do is start with some positive discrimination. So I really have noticed some small things, such as I enjoy watching the cricket. I like watching the cricket, and I like watching AFL, and my daughters will breeze past the screen when that thing's on. But when there is a female team playing, my goodness, they're sitting there on the couch and they're watching. And it's really, really important. It's just a great, you know, just a reflection to know that you can't be what you can't see. Right? So that if there isn't positive discrimination, to have role models in that place, then that has a massive impact on young women and their decision making about whether this is a career or a path for them. So, you know, we've gone off track for the past 3 decades, and we've got an enormous amount of work to do some right in that space. And I think it starts with a positive discrimination, and we just have to stick a hand up and say we have to just, you know, do better in this space. So the second thing I'll say is that we have to work really hard on the language. So over the last 3 decades, we've got some very strong gender biases in the language we use and the way we talk in the IT community, and all the way through to man in the middle and all those sorts of things that we just have to unpick, because it's those little things that just start to add up that doesn't make it an inclusive workplace to be in. And I think we have to work hard on those little things to make that space work for everybody. We do need to, that reminds me, we do need to, you know, drive towards an inclusive workspace, and that's really, really important. And for me, as a middle-aged white man, what I have to do is put my listening ears on, and I have to hear what that means, and not just think what I think it means, and just make sure that we're implementing those things and doing better each time to get in that space. As an employer, I feel we need to take a risk as well in this space. I talked about positive discrimination, but it's really, really important. you know, there's clear evidence that diversity can allow us in the innovation space to create and do things that we can't do with 50% of the population. So you could only ever sell or build things to 50% of the population. So economically, it doesn't even make sense, not if we don't even think about the ethics. So we need to make sure that we're taking a risk. For us, we have a couple of clear policies, and Shay reminded me over chat about them. Firstly is that we run our ads through a gender bias filter to make sure that we don't make a mistake in that process, because as a middle-aged white man, it's very easy to do. And the second is to make sure that if a recruiter comes back and they've given us some candidates and there's no female candidates, we don't work with that recruiter. We send it back and they have to bring us a female candidate, or if we give them a warning and if they persist in doing that, then we will walk away from that recruiter, because we think that's the only way to sort of drive them to work harder in that space. Now for Pen 10, we've gone from 0 to 25% females, and that's great in 4 years, but that is just not good enough. And I think we all have to work really hard in this space to just, you know, to right what is 3 decades of wrong in this space. And that just means just leaning in the other direction and doing that deliberately in that space. I would say for all of the, you know, all of the young women looking to work in the IT space, I can sense your frustration, and I get that with young girls. But we're not probably going to make this change in a year, but we all have to keep working hard in this space so that we can make it a better place for all of those people who are going to follow.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Rachel.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, Ben, I agree. There's kind of 3 things for me, I guess. There's merit that we need to talk about. There's structures, like what you were talking about before. And there's the missing stair, which I'll get to at the end. So from a merit point of view, and just to preface, until a few months ago, our company was more than 75% women. So we've been actively recruiting for men to rebalance, and we're now at 45% men, which is great. So we've managed to haul some of you guys in here, which is good. But that was a concerted effort, because one of our structures and one of our policies is we have a target, and this is actually one of my KPIs that I have set, that we will have gender balance at all levels in all teams. So our tech team was all women until a couple of months ago. The reason for that is this merit issue. So when we hire just on merit and we look at people's years of experience or whatever it is, for the more senior roles, you will just end up with men usually, because women have been consistently discriminated against in passive and sometimes not so passive ways. So by the time you're looking for senior resources, there are less women still in the ring. It is hard to get the resumes. But when we started our startup, we couldn't afford senior people anyway. Like, I'm the C everything O at this stage, right? There's no other senior people in the company. We're hiring grads, and when you hire grads on merit, you will exclusively hire women, because they graduate with higher marks, more extracurriculars. They do better at university on average. So we actually found it quite hard to find junior employees who were men who were as qualified as women. So we had to, at that stage, just hire who was going to be the best for the role. When you can't afford senior people, you need the absolute best junior people. But we knew at that stage, well, we are heavily leaning towards these young women now, and we have to rebalance this again. So merit's important, but you've got to be careful, because it bites both ways. So the next thing that you need is those structures. So yeah, like I try not to be on panels anymore where I'm the only woman with 4 other men. If a company wants to work with us and partner, and I go to the About Us on their website and it's like 18 white dudes all standing on the stairs for their photo, I'm like, yeah, maybe not, because you guys aren't getting it. You know, if you are an established company and you're still so homogenous, you're missing the trick. Like, you haven't realized and recognized that diversity of all kinds is important, and that's not going to really jive with us, you know, because that's an important part of our company and our values. So you need to understand how and why you're hiring the people that you're hiring. You need to have structures in place that actively fight against that inbuilt discrimination, but you also have to have zero tolerance, and that's the missing stair issue. So I don't know if you've heard this analogy before, but in a lot of communities, especially I have found this in the IT community, there is someone in that friendship group or that company or that team or that group of students who is like a missing stair. And the people who are used to that person will say, oh, don't mind him, avoid him, he gets a bit handsy, he gets a bit weird. They know there's a missing stair and they've all learned just to step over it. And when you enter that environment, you are just going to fall right through it. And they will tell you, just step over the missing stair. No, no more of that. You know, there are plenty of women here on the call, and if you're a woman who's been through this work environment, as I have now for 15 years, I have had, like, looking back, extremely harrowing experiences with men in these companies that were absolutely accepted at the time, and I accepted them too, because it was a missing stair and it was my fault for not stepping over that guy or stepping around. And you can't tolerate that. Whether you're a woman running a company or you're a man running a company, you have to look for those people who are causing that disruption and causing that discrimination, and you've got to root them out. They've got to go, because that stuff can't be accepted anymore in any arena, in the workplace, in university, in your friendship groups. So I think if we get more rigorous with doing that, I think that's going to really improve the retention of women in these workplaces.
Thanks for that. I like that analogy. I think that's a problem that a lot of people have trouble verbalizing. So I think that's a good way of putting it. I actually have quite a lot of audience questions. If you don't feel as if any of the questions are particularly applicable to your company, or just feel free to pass on that. I think Eloise wants to ask a verbal question first, so I'll hand over to her to ask that.
Hi, thanks guys so much. Thank you for coming today and speaking. It's been really great. And actually, funnily enough, Rachel, what you were saying about not speaking on panels where you're the only female, not even on purpose, just through the contacts that we reached out to. Kylie McDermott, who was speaking, but had to pull out just last minute due to our family commitments. So we were originally going to have a 3 female, 1 male panel. And so I thought that was pretty cool, actually, because it wasn't even really, like, we definitely wanted to have diversity on the panel, but we didn't, necessarily do it on purpose. But it just went out that way, and that's really cool. And even, today it's been great. This is just a bit of a fun question, I guess, to get us started, because it's actually World Literacy Day today. So I was wondering, because of that, I was wondering if you guys would be able to share maybe your favourite book, if you have one.
Everyone's scratching their chin. I'm the only one not on mute. So I have heaps of favourite books. Like, how do you choose? But I actually wrote as I mentioned, I did Latin at uni, and I wrote my thesis on this Latin epic poet called Lucan, who's been, like, lost to history. He was a real pain in the ass, this guy. Like, he was hard work. And he wrote this book, it was called The Civil War, and it was about Caesar, ostensibly, and what, like, a dirtbag he was, but it was really about Nero. And he wrote it and he published it, and Nero was like, you're done. You need to earn life. So he did. So I wrote my thesis about him, and I still have, like, a place in my heart for this idiot, Lucan, who wrote this awesome book and met a tragic end, really, of his own making. Ben, Tessa, have you got one?
I'll go. Probably so there's this author called Haruki Murakami. If anyone's heard of him, and he the kind of the genre that he writes in is magic surrealism, which is basically turning the everyday mundane things into something of wonder and magic, and finding little magic scenarios, which I love. And I love reading his stories, and it's quite relaxing and kind of daydream like. And there's this book called Kafka on the Shore, and it has talking cats, and any book with a talking cat in it is a good book. So highly recommend.
I knew I'll be caught out here in this panel, asking a question like that. I read non-fiction books about technical stuff normally, but I guess the fiction ones I've been reading lately are the ones to my kids. So I'm really excited by that. But I do have one of my favourite tech authors. Was a book written in the 1980s, and it's still one of my favourite in this space. It still inspires me. It's a story about a system administrator who got his first job as a system administrator in the Lawrence Berkeley laboratories in California. And his job, as Tessa said, like the intern thing, you get some, side issue to work with that, that you give the intern. And his job was that the mainframe, or the cloud-based computing system, there was a discrepancy between the utility that are reported, or how much it consumed, versus the billing system, because what they were doing is they were internally billing all the departments for its use. And the discrepancy was 1 cent. And they just wanted to know who wrote the code, and can you just review the code and make sure that, and you can understand why there's a 1 cent discrepancy, like fix it up. And what he discovered was that there was an adversary, a hacker, that hacked into the mainframe and was using the resources there for their own purposes. And what he did was spent the next 2 years of his life going behind his boss's back, and he went on a crusade to find out who this hacker was and track them down. And it was written in the 1980s, when all of this stuff was new. His way of discovering it was to is to collect the data. Was he used to plug in line the modem connections with a line printer, and so print out all of the actions that were performed and then back into the mainframe. So really, doing smart things to try and get this, to solve this problem. And I'm still inspired reading that. And he's just one of those people in life that just wouldn't say no, couldn't take no as an answer, and just was so curious that needed to find out and discover. And I just inspired by those people.
Sounds like a really interesting book, actually. I might have to pick that one up.
Did I tell you it was called The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll? The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. It's great. It's and it's a book that we can all read because it's got really big writing, and you can read through it, and it's even got a little love story in there too. So there's something for everyone. So I love it. You can read it in a weekend.
Cool. Noted.
Thanks so much for that, guys.
Cool. So we'll start with some questions from the audience. So the first one is from Toby Henson, and he wants to know what effect cyber threats and security have had on startups and your field. We'll start with Ben, and then Rachel and Tessa, and we'll just keep that order for all the questions.
Thanks, Toby. It's a good question. I guess we're a cybersecurity company, so so I guess a lot of things that we've faced have we've been working hard to think of problems and how to solve them, and much like how the way Rachel described it is that really it's about trying to find a way to do things in a more efficient way that allow people to address and solve the problems of cybersecurity without having to recruit a whole bunch of people to solve the problem, or do things a little bit efficiently or a little bit easier than they were doing before. We're finding that the new AI processes that are coming through, that all this great research in this space is really lending great value in there to do and to automate things that we couldn't really do before. So I think that's it's generally opened up a lot of challenges for us all to try and solve as a community. I think that's where it's affected us as a business in terms of startups. But I would say that that's a two-edged sword. Along with that, it's one of the things that does keep me awake at night. And I know that it's even a business that's focused on cybersecurity, it's a matter of it's a matter of when, not if. And I was hopeful that we're ready to be able to respond and react to that, and to protect our customers' data, if and when the event occurs. And I just think that expecting it's not going to occur is the wrong choice. But as a startup, you can never put enough resources into cybersecurity, and it's really tricky, especially when you're in the early days, of just about how much you're spending in that space. And I like what Tessa explained, when you're rapidly spinning things and throwing them into prod, as you have to do as a startup, where do you find the balance between that and making sure you're doing the right thing? It's very tricky.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So it's cyber threats and cybersecurity are opening up a new horizon for us in terms of providing our capability. So, previously, as I mentioned, as an auditor, we saw these things happen a lot. And even just 5-6 years ago, whenever it was, I remember telling senior leadership at the Department of Defence, I found this vulnerability that could lead to loss of life of actual personnel in the field. Like this could have a catastrophic impact, and this is how it could be exploited. And they told me that's science fiction. That won't happen to us. So even just a few years ago, there was this real sense like, it's not real. It doesn't mean anything. It's not going to happen. This is crazy. Well, that's all gone now. Now, all the way from big government, all the way down to small businesses, understand there is a threat and that they can be exploited and that the impacts will be serious. So now everybody wants to do something about it. We've always had this enterprise capability, and we have lots of government clients buying it, because they understand the enterprise risk. But we're now able to provide the solution to small businesses as well, because there's suddenly a demand. That you don't have to convince them that there's a problem that they need the solution for. They know they have a risk. Everyone has sensitive information. Everyone has IP. Everyone has personal data that's subject to rules and regulations and needs to be protected. So everybody needs it, which is good. So I think, the more, the threat environment expands to just consume everyone, the more there'll be room for companies who are addressing that, not just for the enterprise, not just for big companies, but for everyone, for SMEs, for sole traders, because all of us are at risk and we need solutions that will protect all of us. And that opens up the small to medium business is more than 90% of business in Australia. And organizations of 10 to 100 people, that's 15% of all businesses. So, it's a big, big market that tech startups haven't ever really addressed before, because there's never been a desire. But now there is, and that is a big, big market to service. So it really changes the lens on what you can do as a startup. You suddenly have your customer base has more than quadrupled against what you might have been selling to before. So, it's good news for startups, which is hopefully bad news for threat actors. But you're just constantly chasing.
Thank you, Tessa.
Yeah, it's just a huge, huge topic, and I know that it doesn't. There could always be more that's done. I think it's a giant rabbit hole that you could dive down, and drawing the line between what's secure and what's hindering progress is also another good point. One of the challenges that we have is that because we run everything in the cloud, we have to trust our providers, not only whether we're doing the right thing, but our providers are doing the right thing as well. And a lot of that is making sure that they're certified with various security. I don't even know what the right word is. Security is not something I don't like to think about too much, or it's very can be very scary. But things like PCI certification, SOC 2 certification. So there's various things that we do to ensure compliance with all the major rules that we should be doing, and making sure we're following those rules, and making sure that our providers are also certified and following those rules, and that's been a big part of this role, and especially as we grow, is ensuring that we're not leaving ourselves open to all the crazy things that could happen.
That's
anyway,
a really
that's all
good
I'd say.
point, Tessa. Can I just follow on from
Yep.
what you said there? Because actually this is really key to know as well when you're starting up a company, is that now there are a lot more rules around what you yourself as the business and as a technology provider need to comply with. So like we used to just have like some vague standards, like maybe you'd follow the ISM, whatever ancient version of it, if you were working with government. But now there's actually heaps, and it's getting more and more serious and more important to comply and be certified with this stuff. And if you want to sell to clients that are overseas, or you want to service EU citizens, for example, you need to comply with GDPR, like right to be forgotten. There's a lot of stuff you need to comply with. And again, that's a really important part of setting up the company, is understanding the rules that apply to you, so that you don't get caught flat-footed when you're trying to sell your product and you suddenly find out it's not certified and it's not certifiable, and then no one is going to buy it.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. So next we have, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher pronunciation, Tun Howlander. He'd like to know what are some key tips to do well in applications and interviews. I think is something every student's wondered about when they're looking to get into the workforce. So I'd love to hear it from you. I'll start with Ben.
Well, I don't think I could give you some advice on this. I don't think I'm qualified to provide that sort of advice. You know, I went for an interview when I was 18 in the army, and they didn't have enough people, so they accepted me, and I was in there for 15 years, and then been in the startup running my own businesses for the last 14. So I think it's been a while since I've done a job interview. I can say what I enjoy about listening to candidates, but I'm not going to suggest that I'm in any way qualified to make a decision or to give you some advice around this. I do think it's important to understand before you walk in the door of the interview, to know a bit about yourself, and making sure that you're going to make some smart choices about who you want to be and who's the type of people you want to work with. I think that's really important, and the way that you work, because I think there's some things that you should make sure that you're, you know, when you're working with somebody, that you're, you know, what you want to compromise on and what you don't want to compromise on, because ultimately life is too short to do something that you don't want to do, in my humble opinion, and too short to do the things in the way that you don't want to do it. So don't just take the first job or pathway that's in front of you. Get to understand a bit more about how you want to do things. Are you somebody that likes to, you know, to do that first bit where you're, you know, bouncing, where you're building up something, but then you're not the type of person that does that 95%, you know, closing the, you know, the finer details on things. Well, just don't try and find a job that puts you in that situation where you're doing that, you know, 95%, you know, final bit of work. You're not going to be happy in that space. You know, if you're the sort of person that likes to have a lot of things on your plate, and you want to be able to manage and handle all of those things at the same time, because that's the way you like to work, and you don't want to focus on one single thing, then, you know, try and find a pathway or an opportunity that presents yourself with that situation, because you'll get the best out of you. And when you get the best out of you, you know, then other people will want to work with that best of you, and it makes for a better workplace. But I don't think I've answered your question really. I'm not very good at interviews, and I probably couldn't provide you some good advice. I'm really sorry about that.
I think that's great advice, Ben. It's you do need to understand what you want to be doing. I think what I like to see on applications, you know, we don't have a lot of time. The people reviewing your application, big company or small company, none of us have much time. Like, we're not going to be poring over it in minute detail and like adding up the years you were doing something. We just really want to see the highlights. And what we want to see is, what did you achieve? Like, it's neat that you worked at this place for 4.5 years, but like, what did you do there that you felt was an achievement? And I've actually just asked my staff this week to update their resumes. It's not because I'm going to sack them all. It's because they need to keep thinking like, okay, I've been here a year, I've been here 2 years. Like, what have I achieved? Like, what have I done that was great? Like my BDM, she's just won us another grant. Like she's won us more grants than her whole year's salary. Like that's an amazing achievement. Put it in there, right? So the way that you make your application really stand out is have all the information there, super simple, easy to see and parse. Because if it's really complex, I'm just going to be like, don't have time to really check, can't be sure, probably not. So make sure that, the basic bullet points are in there. But all I want to know about your job is not the list of duties that you did. I want to know what you achieved. I found this problem and I fixed it. I increased the profitability of this from X to Y. And the way to do that is right now in your current jobs, whatever they are, if they're volunteering, if they're work placement, internships, is capture those baselines. You can't say I improved something from X to Y if you never took a measure of what X was. So always be thinking when you're working, like, what am I trying to achieve here? And how crap is it right now? Like, how do I measure the crapness so that I can show how much value that I added? Because that is the stuff that will get you the next job. That's how applications look really good. And in terms of interviews, there's heaps of interview tips you can get, but the only thing that consistently makes me like, about clients is if I ask them like just the most basic thing about what they understand about our technology, and it's clear they have no idea what we do. And we have a really comprehensive website. Like just do a little bit of Googling. And sometimes people just like clam up, they freak out, it's hard to get it out. It's no worries, but you have to understand a little bit about the company that you want to work with, and not just what their tech does, but also what else you can learn from their website about their values and their culture. Because if you haven't like checked into us, like if you've done even less effort researching me than I did reading your resume, we're not going to have a good interview. Tessa.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah, so important to do your research and actually read the website. It doesn't, I don't need to know what, everything that was on the website, but just a basic overview of what we did, just to show that you have made the effort to go have a poke around and have a look. Something that I like to see too, and I've seen this done a few times, is people have gone in and seen, oh, these are the technologies, and they've actually taken the time to do a bit of read up on what those technologies do, and which is really good, because it's such niche products that it's really hard to find anyone who knows anything about these technologies. So even just something really just something little just stands out, that you understand some basic concept about it. I was looking for an opportunity to bring up that we got some grad roles for 22 advertised at the moment. I'll probably have to find somewhere to send a link or something, but we've got 2 roles. We got more than 2 roles, I think at least 10 or something, but 2 type of positions: graduate technical operations engineer and a graduate software engineer. So, and the sort of things that I look at, which is hard when you're a uni student, you probably don't have that much experience, but I'm not looking for 10 pages. Maybe keep your CV to 1 or 2 pages, and put anything in there that kind of paints a picture of what your interests are and where you're looking to go. I like to see, even if you're not working currently, what projects have you been working on? What things at uni have you been interested in? What technologies have you used? And especially, what did you achieve by doing that? What did you learn? I think I interviewed one guy once, and I asked him, because part of our role in technical operations is having customer kind of service skills. And I asked him, have you had anything? And he's like, oh, I've just worked at Macca's. And I'm like, why isn't that on your CV? And he's like, oh, I didn't think it was that important. And I'm like, well, if you've got nothing else in there, put Macca's on your CV. It's not, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I mean, you're learning how to, conflict resolution, managing expectations. There's so many things that you learn from your part-time, casual, retail jobs that are applicable even in these technology roles. And I want to see those on CVs, because I don't see them enough. All I see is uni student has applied, here's their transcript, and they may or may not have worked anywhere. And I can't really tell just from looking at that, what are they interested in? What kind of things, what kind of hobbies that they've done that, you know, related to the tech industry, whether, you know, they've tried to run some home automation using, you know, Linux and got a server in AWS doing fancy stuff. I want to see that, because that shows to me that you're switched on, you're keen to learn something, you're keen to teach yourself something. Those are the sort of people I want to see apply, who are driven not just by, you know, getting the top marks, but are actually personally interested in technology and want to learn more and are keen to just teach themselves new things.
That's a really good point, Tess. I agree. So one of the first questions we ask people is, if they're going for a tech job, is what's your home network like? And, you know, what are you doing at home? And if their eyes don't light up with passion and they start raving about the, you know, the horrible thing that they've built that doesn't really work, that's over-engineered, or, you know, they're probably not going to have a good fit in our place. And if they're a software engineer and you say, what open source projects you've been working on, and they say, I don't really code on the weekends or on the evenings, it's like, well, you don't really love this stuff, man. You know, that's the sort of person that we want to see, is not necessarily your, you know, university grades or scores, that you just have a passion or a desire or a love for the thing you're doing. That's the most important thing.
Definitely. That stands out to me when I see those kind of details in a CV. That makes me notice them and makes me think of what kind of person they are. So, yeah. But different managers are quite different. I've worked with managers who will see one typo in a CV and completely discard the whole application. And I just think, in this day and age, you can't really do that. And I don't think it's really a good indicator of someone who's going to be a good employee or not. Anyway.
Thanks all. That was very interesting. Look, we're at time, so I think we'll just skip the outro. Any questions that are remaining, we might email them out to you, and if you have time, you can just, you know, send us the answers, and we'll put them up in our various communities for people to have a look at. But I'll hand over to Arati now to do our conclusion.
Hey everyone, I'm Arati and I'm the marketing coordinator for UCSWIS. Thank you to our speakers, Ben, Tesla, and Rachel, for providing us with such great insights and taking time out of their busy schedule to speak to us. I also wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in. If you are interested in coming along to our future events, SUDO is organizing online games and bite-sized workshops on Thursdays over on Discord. UC Engineering Society is organizing movie night next Tuesday, so that's the 14th of September. So we're currently deciding on what movie to watch over on Discord, so make sure to vote. And finally, for SWIS, we're currently looking for student submissions for our Women in STEM magazine. So if you are interested, you can find more information on our Instagram page. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you.